So Michelle, is this for, are you doing is this like for a research, is this a research paper? Is this a thesis?
Yes, so this was a research paper from last year.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I'm not, it's kind of like for just for this class specifically, but I don't think I'm gonna do a thesis.
Yeah. Is this a class you took with Dr. Abnett? It sounds like right up his alley.
Yes, yeah, it's American Technocultures.
Oh my gosh, so cool.
Yeah, I think because I know his specialty is robots too, so I'm like, I'm also gonna do a robots paper.
Yeah, we're working on, I think it's going to take a while to get off the ground, but and Dr. Abnett is part of this where we're trying to work on a collaboration with the Department of Computer Science where we'll develop a program that spans computer science and the humanities and social sciences.
Oh wow.
And provide students with some basics in coding and also some a deep look at like the morals and the ethics of computing and technology.
That's super
I
interesting.
know, I can't, I'll be so happy when that takes off.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
just takes a while to do the collaboration with other colleges.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So what year, how many more years do you think you have in the grad program?
So I'm finishing up my second year right now, and I should be done by next spring.
Hmm.
Yeah, but I think yeah. So right now I'm kind of deciding my exit option. I think I'll probably do comps, and then hopefully have that all ready by next year.
Hmm. Did you do your undergrad here?
I did my undergrad at Cal State Long Beach.
Oh, okay. That's where I am right now. I live in Long Beach, so.
Oh, nice.
And did you do your undergrad in American Studies?
No, I did Asian American Studies, and actually, so I work at Cal State Long Beach, and then a professor in our department was like mentioning American Studies, and she graduated from Fullerton in American Studies, so that's how I like transitioned over.
Oh, great. Great, great, great. Okay. All right. So I will let everybody know that this is being recorded because I know that there were a number of people who were excited about these paper topics, but they had course conflicts or other obligations. So our hope is to make these widely available, which is why this is being recorded. I want to, before I introduce our speaker here, and her paper topic, I did want to tell you a little bit about how the importance of this event, and also some housekeeping things about when to use the chat, when to use the question answer period. This is our annual HSS Student Research Symposium. This is designed, the theme is chosen, the applications are chosen by our student groups, by the leaders of our students groups, our HSS ICC. So that this really shows our commitment all the way from faculty, staff, students to allowing our students to present the original research that they have created. It's one of the things that I think really sets Cal State Fullerton apart from some of our peers, is this emphasis on highlighting just the real creativity of the research of our students. So I am very excited to present our first speaker, Michelle Okawa. She is a graduate student in American Studies, And her paper is titled Resistance to Representation: The Cultural Work of Asian Female Robots in Science Fiction Films. I am going to ask that people, people have access to two different buttons. There's a chat button, and then there's also a question and answer. So what I ask is, if you have a question that you want to pose to the presenter, please use the Q&A box. That's where I will be looking for questions that you would like the presenter to answer. We also have a chat box. So if any moment you just want to like yell a yoo-hoo, or oh my gosh, I've experienced that too. Oh, have you thought about this movie? That's where you would use the chat box to give affirmations and to, be part of the conversation. I will say there is an opportunity drawing for students who asked a question using the Q&A. Your name will be put in a hat to win a $25 Amazon gift certificate. We have 10 of those to give out. So, please use that Q&A to ask some questions. All right, I am going to hand it on over to you, Michelle.
Perfect, thank you. I'm going to share my PowerPoint. Okay, great. So hi everyone, my name is Michelle Okawa, and I just want to say thank you so much to the HSS for this opportunity to present my research. The title of my presentation is Resistance to Representation: The Cultural Work of Asian Female Robots in Science Fiction Films. So the purpose of my presentation is to understand how depictions of Asian female robots on screen can influence the larger sphere of American culture, and also how Asian American creators are finding ways to challenge these representations. So first, I'm going to start by briefly explaining the origin of Asian female robots in American culture. There's three threads that point to the construction of Asian women into the form of robots. So the first is this early association of Asians as machines, which began in the 1800s. And then during this time, upper middle class white men would often depict women and people of color through demeaning depictions as robots, because they saw this as an opportunity to reclaim power and masculinity. As a result, Asian robots were often depicted as highly orientalized. On the right is a picture of Ajib, the mystifying chess automaton from 1885, who is largely credited as being the first Asian robot in the US. So second, we have the history of fetishizing Asian women, which began as early as the 1800s. And this was the result of increased encounters between the Western world and Asia. So according to film scholar Celine Pareñas Shimizu, this trope of hypersexual but docile Asian women became prominent in American film and popular culture, specifically after US-led wars in Asian countries. So these events constructed this longstanding idea that an Asian woman's body is available for sexual conquest. As a result, Asian women were often depicted as docile, deviant, but above all else, sexually excessive on screen. And then third, we have this growing fear of Asia on the global market. So during the 1970s, there's this growing discourse surrounding Asia's threat as a technological powerhouse. And this is triggered by two events. One is the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act, which saw an increase of Asian immigrants into the US, and then also the booming Japanese car industry in the US. So these events led to this growing fear towards an Asian-dominated future. Okay, so these three concepts culminated to construct the image of Asian female robots on screen. Here's a couple examples from the films Cloud Atlas, Ex Machina, and Ghost in the Shell. So in these roles, Asian female robots are depicted through these highly contradictory images because they're technologically advanced through their bodies, but they're also contained in these exoticized and stereotypical roles that are reminiscent of traditional Orientalism. So on screen, it's common to see depictions of Asian female robots as submissive and subservient, but highly sexual and prone to malfunction, which often leads them to become violent and murder humans. So this dichotomy is deeply rooted in the history of stereotyping Asian women in mainstream Hollywood films, because there's this binary that they're either docile or dangerous. Oops. So next I'm going to talk about the cultural influence that these Asian female robots have in the larger American culture. It's important to consider how these depictions in film are a way to reinforce longstanding ideas about race and gender. So, according to sociologist Anne Swidler, culture influences thought by shaping habits, skills, and styles for people to construct strategies of action. And films are a component of culture that influences viewers to act in the larger collective consciousness. Nancy Wang Yuan, another sociologist, also writes that mass media institutions like the Hollywood studio system often reinforce racist ideologies, which leads to assumptions about particular racial groups. So these are a handful of examples used to demonstrate this point. First is the construction and advertisement of Asian female sex robots. So there's a sex doll line called Roxy, and they released a doll named Young Yoko, which is made to emulate a Japanese schoolgirl. And based on the advertisements and promotional material, the doll was marketed mainly towards men, and with likely this pedophilic tendency. So there's this argument that sex dolls are an opportunity for consumers to explore primitive desires, even if illegal, without the risk of harming actual people. However, the ownership that men exhibit over sex dolls can normalize oppressive behavior towards women, and in this case, Asian women. So the second example is dating harassment experienced by Asian women. And in 2013, there was a poll that revealed that men of all races, except for Asian men, preferred dating Asian women. And this term, this dating preference is called yellow fever. So while this is disguised as a flattering compliment, it's actually a form of racial fetishization. And recent studies found that the dating harassment experienced by these women cause psychological burdens because it reduces them to superficial elements such as their appearance. Third is the influence on mainstream pornography viewing preferences. So on December 11th, 2019, Pornhub, which is the most frequented adult website in the US, released their 2019 year in review data. And this presented statistics on the site's most popular categories and viewing trends. So the website reported that 4 out of 6 of Pornhub's most searched terms of 2019 consisted of Asian related categories. And the number one search term was Japanese. So most recently, we've seen how harmful this stereotype can be as it was centered in the recent Atlanta spa shootings that happened a couple weeks ago. So the killer blamed Asian women for the cause of his quote unquote sexual addiction and killed 8 people, of which 6 were Asian women. So these are examples of how dangerous this narrative is when it continues to be circulated on screen, particularly in the form of Asian female robots. So while depictions of Asian female robots in science fiction films have been largely oppressive, the examples that we've covered, Asian American creators are finding ways to challenge these representations and even embody the robot identity as a form of empowerment. So a couple of examples include the short film Cake, which was released in 2016, and the director Anne Hu cast herself in the role of a sex robot. So she uses this film to show her vulnerability by allowing herself to embrace the robot identity for empowerment, but also she acknowledges her own position of inequality. Another example is the television show Westworld, which places women and people of color in the role of robots. And the show largely critiques dominant culture. One of the show's creators is Taiwanese American, and her name is Lisa Joy. And in interviews, she expresses this like awareness of how robots are being portrayed. So during season 2, one of the storylines centers on the reprogramming of the park's robots, which causes them to rebel against their human developers. And one of these robots is an Asian female robot named Akane. So despite playing this traditional geisha role, Kane is written with a more complex storyline, and she demonstrates self-determined actions that deviate from familiar Asian female stereotypes. So to conclude my presentation, I want to reiterate that these longstanding representations of Asian women are continuing to be repurposed in the form of robots. So Asian American creators are doing incredible work. They're finding ways to embody the robot identity as a form of empowerment and even critique dominant society by showing complicated portrayals of Asian women in familiar roles. However, it's important to note that representation is not the end-all solution to racism. So journalist Connie Wang wrote this article in Refinery 29, and she argues that even though it was a landmark year for Asian American visibility on screen, in the wake of the Atlanta shootings, it's clear that we need more than representation to fix our institutions. So Connie Wang says, I worry that the current conversation about representation distracts us from addressing the root cause of suffering, and that representation is considered by too many as an adequate solution. I think this is an important point to end on because more representation is absolutely important. However, as longstanding stereotypes continue to be circulated, it's also necessary to dismantle and criticize our longstanding institutions in order to advocate for sustainable and equitable change. Thank you. That's my presentation.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for this very timely, for opening us up to this very timely conversation. I'm now going to open it up to our audience members. So there are two ways that you can ask questions. You can use the Q&A box, as I mentioned before. If it feels like you need to articulate your question verbally, or if you want to have more of a back and forth with Michelle, feel free to raise your hand and I can unmute you. We have 2 minutes before our next presentation, so probably enough time for one question for Michelle. Lots of love coming through the chat.
Thank you so much. Really quickly, I think with recent events, like the research kind of evolved currently, but I know last year when I finished writing this paper, I kind of ended it on this positive note where it's so great that we have representation. But I think recently I kind of added this additional additional commentary about it because it's like a very relevant conversation that's still happening.
Thank you. All right, I am going to make sure we stay on time, Michelle. I'm going to put you back into the audience so you can continue listening to the next series of papers. And thank you so much again for conducting your research and sharing it with us.
Thank you so much.
I am going to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Mario Murillo, who is also from American Studies, a graduate student. And Mario will be speaking on the topic of contemporary classic, the rise and resurgence of the American pinup. All right, take it away, Mario.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Yeah, my name is Mario, a graduate student of American Studies. My presentation today is called Contemporary Classic, the Rise and Resurgence of the American Pinup. And in this presentation, I'm going to discuss why the pinup reached its apex during World War II and why the multiple meanings it had are now different in contemporary America. So despite going through a period of evolution, I want to discuss how and why the modern pinup's new meanings have also reestablished its resurgence, expanded its cultural representation, and helped women's social presence evolve. I hope I can help give the public a better understanding of the importance of the contributions of the American pinup and why she still remains a part of a broader American culture despite its evolution. We look at this image here, And that's what we think about. That's a pinup. It's an image of a woman for a man to gaze at. So let's see if that's the case. So I'm going to fast forward to 1940 and keep in mind that this, the pinup has a history dating decades and decades back. But by now, she's the image of advertising and mass consumerism. So for men, these images epitomize whiteness of the ideal all-American girl. But for women, the pinup represented a different perspective. The Vargas girl is a universal name for the pinup. She was created by Alberto Vargas, and she is the one in the middle here with the black bathing suit. She was painted, dressed provocatively, and one could actually be fooled into believing that she could really exist. She was painted to resemble a real woman, and ordinary women could actually try to become her. Most importantly, it defined what the American pinup would become, and that would be a beautifully formed, flawless white woman. So is the pinup just an image of a woman? The way Vargas painted his girls, busty, blonde, long-legged, sultry, and red-haired, is what Hollywood starlets based their glamorous looks after. His girls were the vision he created, and the movie studios produced the real thing. But eventually, she became the ideal that many men went to war for. So for almost 4 years, combat tech thousands of young American men away from home for the first time in their lives. They needed something familiar to help them stay connected and remain in their home life. Excuse me. Oh, give me 1 second. Sorry. Their home life. It was helped to use morale and their fighting drive. So author and professor Linda Williams notes that in letters written by some servicemen, they stated that it was the pinup who they were fighting for and not liberty or democracy. Pinups were purposely painted and photographed in provocative poses and displayed in extreme femininity to reinforce heterosexual values, also to encourage xenophobic views. And most notably, the pinup was always the white all-American girl. She became the image of dominant and racial representation. Now, in addition, the pinup was used in recruiting fighting men to go to war, now seen as a symbol of patriotism and ability to produce American victory. Women embraced the powerful social meaning it presented, and it helped ordinary women become mindful and assertive about their sexuality. And it represented the drastic social changes women's roles were going through, no longer in traditional roles. And she was aimed at the public to be more accepting of a woman's ability, not only to be professional, but self-expressive in a sexual manner in which a woman could find pleasure in. So what's the connection? We see these airplanes and we see these pinup women. So for men who flew in warplanes, taming a machine that would be the difference between a life and death became their epiphany. They needed to become one with each other. The ritual of decorating instruments of war dates back to days of ancient civilization, such as Spartan shields, Viking ships, native paint on Native American horses. It's a practice that some psychologists have found gains an individual's trust towards an object that will prevent his death or induce a destruction he has been trained to deliver. The warplanes had an element of beauty of their own. Aerodynamic Art Deco lines, the roar of the engines, the power and capability of destruction it was engineered to produce created technological sublime. So why give these machines a female identity? Aircrew saw this as something they needed to tame and dominate, just as many males fantasize about being able to conquer and control a woman. They were trying to humanize a machine in order for it to do their bidding. So once that was accomplished, they would make it their own and protect it the same way the airplane would protect them. The men would give the airplane its own identity, and by sexualizing it in their minds, it became their dream girl. The pinup art on it also became the talisman, warding off negative superstition, aesthetically fitting with the beauty of the airplane itself, hoping it would help them successfully complete their missions and get them home safely. It also represented the type of woman each man on the crew hoped they would meet when they returned home from combat, or a wife or a girlfriend. Nose art, as it became known, became a symbol that created brotherhood between these air crews. So I'm going to fast forward to modern years now. Just keep in mind, the pinup was phased out for almost 20 years and eventually resurged in the 1980s. But what happened, the reason it disappeared was because of domestic containment. The government claimed there was a link between juvenile delinquency and pornography, and America was reinstating traditional American values. So I'm going to talk now about the modern pinup. The pinup research in order for a woman to mimic and explore her own sexual potential. It's become the reflection of a woman's ability to revolve through conventional norms that survive patriarchal barriers of the past. The depiction of the pinup, the tease, the taboo, the allure has also continued to help many women find their identities, realize their own beauty, and embody their own sexuality. The pinup culture isn't just about modeling. It's about a woman owning their own body, embracing her flaws, her self-beauty in a way for her to encompass her feminine side. Women pay tribute to the classic pinup by recreating her, and then they mold her in their own image. Looking at these three images here, from a woman's perspective, she may see what a man sees, but she can also see power, attitude, sexuality, and inspiration. Some models stay away from conventional settings when they do pinup photography, such as kitchens or secretary work, since the pinup seems to lose its empowerment because now they're being placed back in traditional gender roles. These pictures show the pinup in a powerful and dynamic way and set forth an energy. It also shows the positive side of a woman's sexuality. It shows her diversity and its various interpretations that have allowed her to express herself in her female form how she wants. She engages a younger audience and makes a good example to keep her essence alive. She stands strong in her photos and in real life. Now, the pinup is an expression. It's more of an attitude. It's a look of confidence and that owns her sexuality. It's a woman who understands who she is, her power, and what she's doing with it. She's able to appreciate a certain aesthetic of the past while being grounded in modern day. Also, the modern pinup has moved away from racial and female oppression. And that's the one characteristic that was absent, was a representation of colored and non-Anglo women. So the modern pinup has also made ongoing contributions through social connections. Now they hold pageants to honor veterans, to empower other women, fundraising for various charities and other events. The American pinup has now been regarded internationally and her style mimicked by different cultures globally. Her ethnicity has become more visible. She connects women of various ethnic groups and social classes. And the modern pinup has also dismantled the notion that there's a single standard of beauty that women must abide by. The modern pinup, we can't define her solely by her past. For decades, she's remained somewhere in between pornographic and portraiture and continues to be a generational paradox for private display or for public exhibit. But the big difference is that women own the image now. It's their story. The pinup is a celebration of the resurgence of the working class, the underdog, celebration of diversity. She's a rebellion that proves that she can be beautiful and powerful in hegemonic, commercialized, and artificial society. So today's modern pinup can resonate with its historic precedents, and because of it, she can stand stronger and more respectable in both male and female perspectives. And that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mario. So there are, I know we're having people who've come in recently, so I want to share that students can use any participant can use either the chat if you want to, offer a way to go, an affirmation. The question and answer box is used to ask questions that you would like Mario to engage with. Furthermore, for students who ask questions in the Q&A, and this is only open to students, there is an opportunity drawing of a $25 gift certificate. We have 10 of those to give out to students who ask questions using the question and answer box. You could also raise your hand if you want to ask your question orally. So we have about 5 minutes that we could devote to questions. All right, so we have one question. Do you think there is a parallel between the tradition of naming ships after women and the pinups on fighter planes?
Yes, actually there is. That tradition goes long. It's that psychological connection between man and that object. Like Viking ships, they have I forgot what it's called, but the front of the ship has that maiden. And also, uh, anything. I mean, even now, more modern days, you have men that built these cars and they name the cars. So it's that the psychological connection of wanting to dominate that machine. Like they feminize the machine, and you see these pinup pictures in the past with telephones. The reason they do that is because telephones were associated with female operators, so you feel like there's a female voice on the other end. So there's definitely that connection.
I would love to do you and Michelle, I see a lot of overlaps, right, between the types of questions, conclusions that you and Michelle, the previous presenter, came came up with. Did you two get did you two start formulating this topic in Dr. Abnett's course on technology, or did you come at this question in it from a different direction?
Uh, no, actually, Michelle's in the same cohort, but this was actually for a U.S. history class with Professor Jansen.
Oh, okay.
And it's something. The reason I picked this topic is, there's so much in the pinup culture, and people don't really know about it. There's not really any academic work done on it. I mean, it is some on the past, but the present, it just disappears because in the 50s, they basically faded out, and they just kind of disappeared. And people still have that stereotype that pinups are used for objectification of women, but that's not the case anymore. Now the women are it's like the shoes on the other foot.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I picked the topic. That's what really interested me. How it's women progress and all of a sudden they get set back by men throughout the years historically. Like the flapper, pre-code films of Hollywood, just everything. But it's just like a roller coaster. But it seems like they're on their way up, so that's good.
Thank you so much for sharing about your process. I think maybe we have time for one more short question, so get it in here before we go to our next speaker, if you have one. All right, Mario, do you also want to, and actually I should have asked Michelle to do this as well. Do you want to put your contact information in the chat box in case anybody wants to thinks of a question later?
Yeah, that's
like if
fine.
you want to put your email address, that'd be great.
On the chat box?
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor.
All right. All right, and when you have done that, I'm going to put you back in the audience.
All set. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Sarah Epp is our next speaker. I will say everybody so far has been really wonderful about staying in time, but Sarah, if you do lose track of time, we do have our mighty Robin Gomes here who will flash up when you have a minute left. She'll flash up a minute sign, and then when you are out of time, she will do a stop sign. She will put up a stop sign. Okay, do you have a PowerPoint presentation that you'd like to share?
Yes, please.
Okay, well, you get that ready. I will introduce you. So Sarah Epp is a graduate student in the English department. She is presenting a paper presentation titled Infatuation Prompted by Mediums, Disturbed and Desperate Minds to be Read Charitably in I knew I was gonna mangle this. Bioi? How do I do the first part of that?
Bioi Casares.
Thank you so much. And Murakami's fiction. All right, take it away.
Thank you for that introduction, and hello, everybody. So first, I will give a brief overview of the two texts that I am addressing. Next, I will share my thesis and evidence from scholarship, the text, and theory. Finally, I will provide the relevance that this topic has in society beyond the text alone. So Adolfo Bioy Casares' 1940 fiction novella, The Invention of Morel, tells the story of a fugitive and unnamed narrator who lives on a deserted island and falls in love with a visiting woman, Faustine, who repeatedly shows no acknowledgement of his advances. And later, he actually learns that Faustine and her group visiting the island are merely projections of previously recorded images, the result of an invention made by Faustine's friend Morel, who records the group without their knowledge. The narrator spends the entire story stalking Faustine, both before and after learning that she is an image. In 1993, 53 years later, Haruki Murakami published The Kangaroo Communique, a fictitious short story of a man, also an unnamed narrator, who works at a department store, receives a written complaint from a woman, and then proceeds to respond to her complaint by writing a letter via a recording, created outside her front door, telling her how her letter arouses him. Both texts highlight male first-person narrators who are stalkers of females, with one caveat: neither females are actually real victims. In the novella, the woman is a projection of an image. In the short story, the woman is never formally introduced. She is only represented via a written complaint to a department store. Both stories deviate from a stereotypical stalker narrative in which a person is stalked, labeled a victim, and threatened by a stalker. In common stalker narratives, the stalker is and should be villainized because there is a tangible threat to real victims. In these narratives, however, perpetrators are protagonists and are not infatuated with women in any true danger, providing readers with the opportunity to view these stalkers in a more nuanced light. In framing The Kangaroo Communique with The Invention of Morel, we learn more as to why these stalkers choose to stalk mediums over people, what this choice reveals about the stalker's complex condition, and why their condition causes us to read them charitably with sympathy. My thesis is that the narrator's infatuation is prompted by mediums rather than humans, with real victims omitted from the narrative. This not only reveals the disturbed state and desperation of the perpetrators, but allows readers to view the stalkers charitably with sympathy. Both stalkers suffer from loneliness and isolation, which provides an explanation for their infatuation with mediums over people. Before discovering Faustine as an image, the narrator in the novella acknowledges that his stalking is a result of his isolation. He says, "I told myself that all this was vulgar. Like any recluse who had been alone too long, I was falling in love with a woman who was nothing but a gypsy." In addition to their loneliness, the narrator's disturbed states are evident in their purposelessness. Murakami's narrator has a less dramatic setting than the fugitive, as he is working a casual job, not deserted on an island, yet his purposelessness is just as apparent. The narrator says, "I am 26 years old and work in the product control section of a department store. The job, as I'm sure you can easily imagine, is terribly boring. The real heart of our work is responding to customer complaints." This narrator, like the fugitive, has an uninteresting role in life, revealing emptiness and a desire for something meaningful, but neither narrator can find it within their isolated states alone. The disturbed state of each narrator is also revealed via their psychological suffering, which causes their infatuation of mediums over people. We can attribute their psychological suffering to melancholia, using Sigmund Freud's definition. Freud says, "The distinguishing mental features of melancholia are a profoundly painful dejection, cessation of interest in the outside world, loss of the capacity to love, inhibition of all activity, and a lowering of the self, which culminates in a delusional expectation of punishment." As Freud describes melancholia, we see our narrators, who are dejected and depressed, not interested in their worlds, unable to love humans, inactive, and self-deprecating, perhaps due to troubled pasts. In choosing to love mediums over humans, the narrators punish themselves, preventing themselves from actual human connection. The narrators live this way, but readers can choose to not punish them, but instead to read them with charity given their conditions. Our narrators have pasts not fully known to readers, but it is clear that these narrators match Freud's description of melancholia and their psychological suffering is why they fall for mediums over people. These narrators are also aroused by mediums because objects, unlike people, can be controlled, and both men are desperate for connection that is within their control. Laura Mulvey, who is a feminine film theorist, helps us understand that further, this male desire is for control of female objects. Mulvey defines the male gaze as the pleasure in looking that has been split between active male and passive female, particularly a female in film. The male gaze continues to exist as the erotic basis for pleasure in looking at another person as object. It can become fixated into a perversion. Sexual satisfaction can come from watching in an active controlling sense an objectified other. Mulvey argues that males find pleasure in looking at females who are passive objects. This act produces obsessive stalkers who are satisfied by watching alone. On the surface, Bioy Casares and Murakami's narrators are objectifying a female other, yet these females are not present. One narrator is looking at a projected image, while the other is aroused by the medium of a written review rather than an image. In this sense, they are objectifying women who are already objects. Gazing at objects gives both narrators a sense of control, and they fantasize that their objects are actually living, giving their objects metaphorical existence without the actual power or unpredictability that comes with real humans. While the fugitive stalking might be interpreted as unethical by some critics, I would argue that knowingly stalking a medium makes the fugitive both desperate and worthy of sympathy, as he is really only harming himself. The narrator in Murakami's short story shares with the woman how he is aroused and fascinated by her letter in particular, not by her. He says, "Your letter was honestly quite fascinating. Your choice of words, the handwriting, punctuation, spacing between lines, rhetoric, everything was perfect. Every month I read over 500 letters, and frankly, yours was the first letter that ever moved me. I secretly took your letter home with me and read it over and over again. Then I analyzed your letter thoroughly. I'm simply moved by it. Enthralled, every part of your letter, down to each ink smear, everything set me off, everything shook me." Here, the narrator directly confronts the fact that his infatuation is prompted by the medium of the letter. The words, handwriting, punctuation, and spacing, not the woman, are what he describes as fascinating. While one might conclude that removing real female victims from the narrative further reinforces the negative perception of women as objects, I would argue that in removing the women from the story entirely, they are not only protected from victim blaming, which is an unfortunate but common trait in modern stalker narratives, but they are also protected from any prospect of any real danger, giving readers the ability to truly look at the complex situation that is the stalker's depressing states. Murakami himself even comments on women as mediums in his writing. Murakami responds to an interviewer's question about gender archetypes in his novels by saying, "In my books and stories, women are mediums in a sense. The function of the medium is to make something happen through herself. The protagonist is always led somewhere by the medium, and the visions that he sees are shown to him by her." This quotation supports the argument that the woman in the kangaroo communique is never meant to be considered a real victim, but a medium. If the women in these two stories were real, we would consider them victims being objectified, but Faustine is an object, and the woman behind the door never comes out. She remains a letter. Therefore, they are already objects, intended to be used to reflect the narrator's unfortunate conditions. Ultimately, Bioy Casares and Murakami challenge our thinking on stalking as an issue by preemptively removing real victims from their narratives, freeing up readers to explore the stalker's conditions without fearing for victims' safety. Society predominantly views the problem of stalking reactively by addressing how to protect a victim of a crime. In these stories, however, readers are given permission to move beyond simply villainizing stalkers, as the stalker's disturbing behaviors are actually blatant, indirect cries for help. How would society positively change if we took care to analyze the lives of those lonely, grasping for control, obsessed with media over real life, or desperate for connection, but too wounded to actually pursue it before a crime was committed? The damaging effects of the male gaze for the narrators in these texts include a devastating ultimatum in suicide for the fugitive and a stagnant state of immobility for Murakami's narrator. But readers can learn from these journeys, written 27 and 80 years ago, by proactively moving toward those who struggle with similar conditions today in charity and sympathy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And this was completely coincidental. I don't know, or maybe it wasn't, but I would not have known from the titles how much overlap there was in all of these presentations. So I'm going to do something I wasn't planning on doing. I hope you don't hate me, but I'm going to bring all the panelists back up to the top of the screen in case people have questions about the connections and the through lines. So I'm bringing Mario, I'm bringing you back up to panelist, and Michelle, I'm bringing you back up to panelist. All right, because this is the fun part of being in a conference, right? You get to make, I know that Michelle, Mario, you know each other because you're in the same cohort. I don't know if any of you know Sarah, but it's exciting to see that there are people in this large community at Cal State Fullerton who are working through some of the same questions. And in this case, the question of objectification of women and what causes it, what are some of the anecdotes to it. So feel free to ask anybody in our audience. Feel free to ask questions of all of our presenters at this time. Or I know Sarah, you didn't. Sorry to yank you from the limelight. I know that you haven't. Feel free to also just ask a question to Sarah raising your hand, using the chat box, using the question and answer. So Brittany Swanson, she shows appreciation. She says, such an interesting change of perspective on this topic. Sarah, were you engaging for those not immersed in this topic, have other scholars compared these particular writers, these particular texts, or that it was the comparison one thing that sets your work apart?
I haven't been able to find anyone who has researched this Argentinian novelist with this, Japanese American fiction writer, but I saw the connections due to the mediums. Mm-hmm. So.
I have a quick question for Sarah too. For these writers, so I know for Murakami, I feel like there is this like reoccurring theme of like the way he writes about women, but I'm not really sure because I don't really read so much of his text. But is this a reoccurring theme like in his work and also the other author that you mentioned as well?
That's a great question. So these are the only texts that I have read from these authors. I do know that Murakami writes very frequently about this type of male first-person narrator who's kind of struggling in life. And I know that Murakami often uses women as mediums, either in this case, literally with the letter, or more figuratively and metaphorically. And then with the other author, I'm not quite sure as I haven't read his other writings.
Was there a difference in that, your focus, Sarah, on, because I think this is how the pieces of literature guide your focus on the condition, the impulse of the stalker. How different are the mediums that they're stalking? Like, how much does that play into the back and forth?
That's a good question. So I originally just wrote a paper on Bioy Casares' novel because it was so tied to Mulvey's theory of the male gaze, where a man is objectifying a female other in an image, right? So we can think about this in relation to film. Mm-hmm. And then as I started reading the Japanese short story by Murakami, I was realizing that while there is an actual woman that we know probably exists somewhere in the universe, she's never introduced. So I started comparing, okay, the medium of a letter versus the medium of film. And I found that the common thread was actually the narrators themselves and how they were, choosing to not pursue real women. The fact that Murakami's narrator pursues a woman who is this anonymous person he's never met. He's an anonymous reader of her complaint. It's not even really a letter that she writes, it's a complaint to a department store. And he's
Yeah.
outside of her door the entire story, the short story, and you're waiting for her to come out, and she never does. So it doesn't feel like that's the purpose of the story. The purpose, it seems to me, as I was reading the text, is really to evaluate the condition of the narrator, which I just thought was an interesting flip on its head of a typical stalker narrative, in which you're so consumed, and rightly so, with the person being stalked, right? You're consumed with that person and whether or not they're safe. But once you're kind of able to, take that hat off, and you're able to actually focus on the narrators. So to answer your question, I saw the common thread being more in their condition versus the mediums that they were pursuing. Just the fact that they were pursuing mediums rather than people was what caught my eye.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to draw connections because Michelle and Mario, for them, it's the meat, it is the how the gate, it's very separate than yours, right? It's how, what is the impact going to be on the person who's being gazed at, or how is the person that's being gazed at, how are they throughout history going to use the medium of being gazed at to assert their own identity. So I agree with Brittany. It's an interesting flip of a way to look at this question. Oh, geez, look at me. I was getting so into talking to y'all. I think this is when this session is supposed to end. I will be quiet and see if there are any other questions from the panelists, comments from the panelists. And then we can wrap up and get to the poster session. Sarah Michelle, would you mind putting your email contact in the chat in case anybody has questions that they want to ask privately? Okay. Thank you so much. So now everybody, the next event of the symposium is the poster session. That is on a different link that you can find on the website. And then we will come back to this link at 4 o'clock to listen to the next four speakers. Thank you so much. See y'all later.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.
Great job.
All right. Okay. See you back here at
So then
3:55 or
4
whatever.
o'clock. Okay, 3:55.
Thank you so much. Bye.